Hi, everyone. Mitch from Pick Dogs here with Chris and Ron. Of course, it is college football week 4. 1/3 of the regular season is going to be done for a lot of teams in college football after this week. Hard to believe that. Of course, time length, there'll be some bye weeks in there and it'll be extended out just a little bit. But one of the cool things this week, and we're going to go over a lot of these games on the show, is now where we see these expanded conferences, some new teams and new faces. We also get some new, really good matchups in this spot. So instead of seeing, Ohio State play, Akron 3 weeks in a row, we get to see some of the heavy hitters go at it. Chris, you excited for week 4 of college football?
Absolutely, I am. Like you said, some great matchups on the board. It's hard to believe that, it seems like just yesterday we were prepping for week 1, week 0, whatever you want to call it. But now we are in the meat and potatoes of conference play. Some fantastic matchups. I'm ready to break it down with you guys.
Ron, we took some heat for our picks last week here on the show, but I got to say, Saturday rolled around, and by the time the clock struck midnight, I was cashing a lot of tickets, and I expect to cash a lot this week. How are things looking over there?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty solid week, and I'm ready to go here. We got some new rivalries brewing now in these power conferences, and some great ranked matches, and even a game on Friday with two ranked teams going at it. So should be a fun week.
Should be an awesome one. Let's get it started. We head to Lincoln, Nebraska for a Friday night matchup of ranked Big Ten teams. And of course, the Big Ten and the SEC dominating the rankings right now in the early going. It should sort itself out as a lot of these teams play each other. But Nebraska, 3-0 start this year. Off to one of their better starts we've seen in recent years. Illinois, not quite getting the respect from the betting public, but man, they're earning some respect on the field. Chris, what do you think of this one?
Yeah, I went back and forth on this one because these are two teams that have gotten off to strong starts, but I'm rolling with Nebraska here, until I have a reason not to. The Cornhuskers look great. Dylan Raiola looks fantastic. This Nebraska defense looks rock solid as well. And I just still have a hard time trusting Luke Altmaier to lead an offense consistently. The Nebraska defense has stepped it up. They're just outside the top 20 in total defense this season, top 15 in rush defense. So I think Nebraska gets it done. I think they win this one by double digits. I'm laying it with Nebraska here.
Ron, you willing to lay nearly a quarter of the total here on the point spread with the home team?
I'm not. I'm really big on this Nebraska team, but I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago when they were playing Colorado that I think in the tougher matchups in conference play, you're going to see some of that lack of experience with Raiola. He's played very well, but this is definitely the toughest defense he's going to be facing so far this year. And I think because of that, this is a lot of points, more than a touchdown for a team that, yes, Illinois is not really battle tested themselves, but they still have a very strong defense. They're pretty solid against the run. I think Altmaier's underrated at the quarterback position. I think they make enough plays to keep it close and cover the number.
When we saw Rule over at Baylor, a lot of the games that we saw were really, really close ones. Games that Baylor won and found a way to win and, kept themselves in it in games that maybe they shouldn't have been in. But I think that this is kind of that style of game. Styles make fights, styles make games. And I think this one sets up for that kind of just sluggy type of game. A lot of settling for 3, a lot of missed field goals too, to be honest with you. So I think this game goes under, and I also like Illinois plus the points. But we got plenty of action as we head into Saturday. We go to Columbus, Ohio, to the Big Horseshoe, where the Ohio State Buckeyes, undefeated, dropping a spot in the rankings, though, unbelievably enough, taking on the thundering herd of Marshall. Not quite the Marshall teams that we've seen in the past, but certainly not any slouch. Speaking of slouches, Chris, what do you think of this matchup?
I think in this one, I got to go with the over here. Just because it's a big number to lay with Ohio State. Would it surprise me if the Buckeyes covered this one on their own? No, because they've won by 46 and 56 this season. But I just think the over is a stronger play. You could have a blowout here from Ohio State, and they could get to this number, like I said, on their own. Or Marshall could chip in a couple touchdowns, help get us up and over this total of 52. So give me the over, Marshall, Ohio State.
Yeah, I'm going to lay the points with the Buckeyes. I just think that Marshall, this is a program that's been solid the last few years, but I think this is a down year for them, and I thought that they were pretty fortunate to get the cover against Virginia Tech. That offense didn't do much of anything in the first 3 quarters of that game. I think Ohio State, similar to what we saw against Western Michigan, just a one-sided affair. And I also think Western Michigan's much improved this year. So that was actually a pretty impressive result, holding them to under 100 yards and only 6 first downs. Give me Ohio State big.
I think the world's going to be on the Buckeyes in this one, and all the value is going to be on this scrappy Marshall team. We saw them blow the doors off a pretty good Stony Brook team, and then battled for the cover, getting 3 touchdowns against Virginia Tech. And while it took the whole 3 touchdowns to get the cover, just about, we're getting almost 6 touchdowns in this game, and I'm going to guess by kickoff we probably will be. It's not going to take much for Marshall to come up and get the cover. Believe me, we've seen Ohio State take some big stumbles over the years. There's a reason why Ryan Day's on the hot seat. I'm going to take Marshall in the points. We head to the ACC country, to Clemson, where the Clemson Tigers take on NC State. Of course, Clemson took one on the chin to start the season against the Georgia Bulldogs, but it's always better to lose early and, to lose to the number 1 team in the country, at that. So Clemson, while it's going to be a little bit of a hill to climb, they certainly can't climb it with still plenty of games left to go in front of them. But this one comes down to almost a must-win game now against NC State in a pretty good regional battle here. Ron, what do you think?
Yeah, I think obviously NC State's dealing with some injuries. We saw C.J. Bailey get some action against La Tech. I still think this is too many points, though. It's been a pretty much disaster start to the year for the Wolfpack, who had a lot of expectations, ranked pretty highly going into the year. We saw them stumble against Western Carolina. They got crushed against Tennessee, weren't great against La Tech, but I still think this team has enough to get, to cover this number. I mean, if this game was played at the beginning of the season, Clemson would be around a touchdown favorite. Now, 20 points, 21 and a half points, just way too many for me. I think Clemson, we saw them lose to Georgia, and Georgia's a great team, but we just saw Georgia barely get by Kentucky. So maybe that blowout loss doesn't look as good now. I think that NC State's defense is enough to cover this number. I also like the under in this one.
I'm going to roll with the other side and go with Clemson in this thing. I think, NC State just purely disappointing. And, we want to talk about the Georgia blowout of Clemson. Let's not forget about the Tennessee blowout of NC State, which was even uglier. I'm not saying Kate Klubnik would start at QB for Tennessee this year, but at the same time, it's not bad. And I think Death Valley also just a super tough building. I expect it to be a bad day for the Wolfpack on the road, who have never been a very good road team. I'm going to roll with the Tigers. Chris?
Yeah, I'm going to roll with the Tigers as well. I just think that Grayson McCall being out, I think there's too much for the Wolfpack to overcome. We saw the Wolfpack struggle to get by Louisiana Tech last time out. I am not a Kate Klubnik fan by any stretch of the imagination, but I think they opened some eyes, Clemson did, by beating up on App State. So I'm going to take the Clemson Tigers in this one, and what we said is a must-win. So give me the Tigers here, laying the big number.
We head to the Big House in Ann Arbor as the Michigan Wolverines, the defending national champions, but a little, bruised up after losing to Texas in week 2. Take on the USC Trojans in one of these games that was kind of the reformulated conferences, right? Normally a game that you would see in the Rose Bowl or something like that. We see it week 4 of the season where, of course, Michigan hasn't left their own backyard for one game. Nothing surprising about that. Typical Michigan season where it just seems they play almost every game at home. And, the thing is that, this Wolverines team just really not very strong play at the quarterback position. And I think that's where they really have been lacking. Yeah, they came back against Arkansas State and bounced back, but I would hardly even call not covering against the Arkansas State at home as much of a comeback. And that's why they have the quarterback change. They still have a very good rushing attack. They're going to have to play keep away against this improved USC defense. I actually, this is, of the Lincoln Riley teams, this is one of the more respectable teams that he's had on both sides of the ball. Of course, it's early in the season. This is going to be a close one. I don't like laying 5.5, though, with the Trojans on the road. I'll take the points with Michigan here. I think they got a chance to win the game outright, but a better chance of covering. Chris?
Yeah, I am going to take USC here. I'm going to lay the 5.5. I think it's a touchdown win for the Trojans. I like what D'Anton Lynn has done with this USC defense out of the gate. I think Miller Moss is the real deal. And I just don't like that quarterback situation in Ann Arbor. The Wolverines announcing they're going to go back to Alex Orji as the starter here after Davis Warren threw 3 picks. Neither Warren nor Orji is giving me a whole lot of confidence in leading this Michigan offense. So I'm going to go with USC. I'm going to lay the 5.5.
Yeah, it's rare to see a USC total sub 50, these days, but I actually like the under in this one. I mean, like Chris mentioned, Michigan's quarterback play has been some of the weakest in power football, and the USC defense is much improved this year, at least so far. They had a tough matchup against LSU, and that defense shined in that game. And Michigan, while they've had their offensive struggles, they're still a respectable team on the defensive side. Held Texas to under 400 total yards. So I think that we see a low-scoring game, a classic Big Ten game. Give me the under.
Next up, we head to South Bend, Indiana, where the Notre Dame Fighting Irish take on Miami of Ohio. I personally had a little bit of money invested in both these teams last Saturday. One cashed for me. That was Notre Dame. It was up by 49 at the half. The other one, Miami of Ohio, which really got out-physicaled by Cincinnati. A little bit disturbing there, but we're getting 4 touchdowns here with the Red Hawks, Chris.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be enough. I think Notre Dame is on major focus here with that loss to Northern Illinois. They don't want to take 2 losses to MAC teams in one season. I think this one's all Notre Dame from start to finish. I think Miami, Ohio is going to be one of the better teams in the MAC this season, but I think Notre Dame just going to come out with their hair on fire here. I'm going to take Notre Dame in this one, laying the big number.
Yeah, I think Miami, Ohio had a lot of expectations because they returned Brett Gabbert, who's been one of the better quarterbacks in the MAC the last few years, but the surrounding cast just doesn't seem to be as strong. I mean, the run game has been miserable. The offensive line's not held up. And even the defense has not been as strong as what we're used to seeing. And we saw him give up over 6 yards to carry last game. I'm definitely not looking to lay points with a team that just earned a 66-7 win, because usually you're not going to find a lot of value after a blowout victory like that. But for me, it's the only way. I think Notre Dame's looking for those style points. I think they get them in this one. I'll lay the points.
I'm going to take Notre Dame in this one. They were my top play 2 of the first 3 weeks. For those of you that buy my premium picks, we cashed on Notre Dame this past Saturday as my top play and on opening weekend against Texas A&M. But in this one, I like them a lot. I think that, the loss to the other MAC team, Northern Illinois, just sets up Notre Dame to be more dialed in and more focused. And what we saw last week at Purdue was coming off of that loss to Northern Illinois. Notre Dame was dialed in and focused. This is Notre Dame. This is college football. The Notre Dame fight song, touchdown Jesus, all those things. These guys get the top tier recruits and top tier transfers. And I just think that Notre Dame, once again, just if they play their game, if they don't beat themselves, they just march in this one. I like for Notre Dame. We saw Cincinnati out physical, Miami of Ohio in the second half. I could see Notre Dame just running all over them as well. I'm going to take the Irish and lay the 4 touchdowns. Next up, we head to Louisville, where the Louisville Cardinals take on the Ramblin' Wreck of Georgia Tech. Interesting ACC battle here, kind of mid-level ACC teams, but these are the games that decide bowl positioning. Ron, what are you thinking?
It's not to discredit Georgia Tech for the start to the season they've had, but at the time, that win over Florida State looked like a major upset. Now we see the Seminoles 0-3. That win's not as, impressive. And I think Louisville is the much better team here. They haven't really been battle tested at all playing Austin Peay and Jack State, but I still like what I'm seeing from both sides of the ball, particularly the offense that's running the ball all over teams. I think they'll be able to get the ground game going against Georgia Tech and win this game and cover the number.
Papa John's can be a tough stadium. I think going to Georgia Tech is a much tougher place to be than Georgia Tech on the road at Louisville. The thing is, Georgia Tech kind of plays this hat-on-a-hat style that we saw against Florida State. Ron referenced that game, and, you could look at it a lot of ways. Did Georgia Tech kind of set the tone for Florida State and kind of knock them off their game for the season and the hangover they haven't recovered from? Or is Florida State just not all that good? Anyway, slice it. Georgia Tech can only beat the teams that are in front of them, and that's exactly what they've done so far. They've played an extra game, and that, of course, helps. But the thing is, one of those games that they played was a loss, and that was on the road against Syracuse. Now, the thing is that I think in this particular game, I definitely think Louisville wins the game. I'm just not 100% convinced that they cover. So I'm going to take the points with Georgia Tech in a game that I think Louisville wins.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm thinking that Louisville wins, but I think Georgia Tech covers. That Syracuse team is a team I'm high on. Kyle McCord has been outstanding for the Orange this season, and while Georgia Tech had to come back a little bit to make that score look a little bit more respectable when the game was all said and done, I still think that Haynes King's done a great job with this Georgia Tech offense. And Louisville, I need to see more than wins over Austin Peay and Jacksonville State before I'm really going to lay 10.5 with them at home here. But again, I think Louisville wins, but I think Georgia Tech covers.
Next up, we head to Auburn, where the Auburn Tigers take on the Arkansas Razorbacks in SEC action. And of course, both these teams have had a little bit of a stumble in the road already this year, as Auburn fell to Cal in a home game. And Arkansas, of course, lost that game at Oklahoma State, that they were way up in that game and let it get away from them. Did not look so good on the bounce back last week against UAB either, to be honest with you. But the thing is after that game against Cal, Peyton Thorne was complaining that bettors had contacted him through social media saying that he busted up their parlay. And, I didn't contact Peyton personally, but you busted up my parlay, dude. 4 interceptions, bro. Not okay, not acceptable, man. And I'm telling you, man, crushed my ticket. And I'll tell you what, not going to let you crush my ticket again. I'm taking the Hogs. Whoa, pig suey. Chris?
Took the words right out of my mouth. I'm taking Arkansas as well here. No Jaquindon Jackson on the injury report, so I think that ankle is going to be good to go. And I like what Taylor Green has brought to this Arkansas offense. I'm with you. I'm down on this Auburn team. I have no expectations for Auburn this season. I could argue that the wrong team is favored here. I'm going to take Arkansas plus the 3.
Yep, give me Arkansas as well. I think that their offense is off to a great start to the year. And, Mitch mentioned that disappointing loss after they were up big against Oklahoma State. They were on the, unfortunate side of the turnover battle, but they still outgained Oklahoma State 648 to 385 in that one, ran for 230 yards and added 416 passing yards. I don't think Auburn can go score for score with the Arkansas here. And while I think the Auburn defense puts up a fight, I don't think it's going to be enough. And, we're getting points here. I think, like Chris mentioned, the wrong team is favored.
Next up, we head to the Bayou, where LSU takes on UCLA in Baton Rouge. UCLA not looking so great under first-year head coach Deshaun Foster. LSU, Brian Kelly's team squeezing one out last week. Chris?
Yeah, I'm taking the points here with UCLA. I'm not there with LSU laying these big numbers. Maybe it's a fade of Garrett Nussmeier more than anything else, but I just don't see him as a 24.5 point quarterback in this LSU team, even at home. I think UCLA is good enough to sneak in the back door and cover this number. I just think this is a case of laying way too many points with LSU. So give me UCLA and the points in this one.
Yeah, I went into this season looking to fade UCLA early. That continues here. I'm going to take LSU and lay the points. I mentioned last week with Indiana matching up with UCLA that it looked like one of the biggest coaching mismatches of the season. This could also be up there with Kelly against Foster. I think LSU rolls.
Brian Kelly, not one of my favorite head coaches, because when it comes to the big game, he usually lays the big egg. But the thing is that Deshaun Foster looks like he needs a year under his belt. He's kind of like a guy that gets called up from the minor leagues in Major League Baseball, a pitcher or something who just needs some experience out there, because that Indiana game against UCLA, if that game goes on another 15 minutes, I think the Hoosiers score 100. Last week, I gave out UCLA against Indiana on this show. It was my worst pick of the week, and I'll tell you, I'm not going to be fooled by it again. I am not big on LSU long-term this year or against any of the big boys, but I am big against them here against a UCLA team that could have a really, really horrific season. Next up, we go to Stillwater, Oklahoma, where the Oklahoma State Cowboys take on Utah, the Utes, in a battle of top front runners in the Big 12 Conference. These are the names that we heard people toss around to win the Big 12 this season and go to the college football playoff. This could be a preview of the Big 12 championship game, really. And I think that is that type of game. Of course, Cam Rising, banged up already, it's only a few weeks. And Ron, what are you thinking in this one?
Yeah, well, I mean, we just talked about how the Oklahoma State defense gave up 650 yards to Arkansas, and we know this Cowboys team is a potent offense, particularly in the passing game with Bowman, and the offensive line's held up in the passing game. They haven't allowed a sack this year, but their offense is a bit one-dimensional, and I don't trust that defense at all. I think Utah, I mean, we rarely see, in a battle of ranked teams where a team has home field advantage, the road team still being the favorite. But this is a situation where Utah, a team that's known for having a great home field advantage, but not so great on the road, they're still favored on the road. And I think for good reason. I like Utah laying the points. I think Oklahoma State probably going to be one of those public dogs that you might want to watch out for, but I'm going to take the Utes in this one.
This game is coin flippy, and usually when it's coin flippy, I usually like to take the points. But in this one, I'm going to lay less than a field goal here with Utah, who I think just is the better team. I think that they're a little bit more battle tested, and I think what we saw last week against Utah State, the game against Baylor as well, just pretty solid stuff. I did not like the way Oklahoma State looked against Arkansas, even though they did come back and win. And wow, they covered against South Dakota State and cost me a couple bucks. Still can't give them all that much credit. I think Utah just a little bit too physical for a team that has some weaknesses like Oklahoma State does. If you gave up that many points against Arkansas, you might never get the ball against Utah. Chris?
Yeah, and that's why I'm going with the over here. I think this is a spot where obviously you want to see what the health of Cam Rising is going into this game, but Isaac Wilson was respectable last week against Utah State, 3 touchdowns, 239 passing yards. So I think he could have some success against this Oklahoma State defense if Cam Rising can't go. And obviously if Rising goes, it's a big step up for this Utah offense. But I think there's something to be said for Oklahoma State and Alan Bowman. This offense for Oklahoma State, top 10 in passing yards per game. I think they can at least do some damage against this Utah defense. So I think this game gets closer to the high 50s. I'm going to go with the over 53.5.
Next up, we head to Tampa, where South Florida takes on Miami. It's a big chance for the Bulls to get on the board here in the state of Florida. And Miami, a chance to really capture or take steps toward a real state of Florida championship, as they played Florida already and beat them this year. And, of course, have Florida State on the schedule in just a few weeks. But South Florida, talk about scheduling up. A second top 10 team they played so far this season. Chris, what do you think of the Bulls' chances in this one?
Yeah, I'm not liking the Bulls' chances here. I'm really high on this Miami team. I like what Cam Ward's done. I like the state of this Miami defense. Top 5 in total defense nationally. Top 5 in terms, just outside the top 10 in rushing yards per game, top 25 in yards per carry. A lot. I think Byron Brown's in for a long day. And I think that while South Florida, they were able to keep things close against Alabama early on, we ultimately saw Alabama, start to pull away in the second half. Wouldn't surprise me if we saw the same here with Miami. I'm going to lay the points with the Canes in this one.
I got to go with South Florida. I think the Bulls have everything that you would want in terms of pulling off a big upset like this. They run the ball very well, including their quarterback, and they've got a very deep running back group. Their run defense has been excellent this year. They've scheduled up, so they've already had a battle-tested matchup against Alabama, which they held the Crimson Tide to under 400 yards. They forced plenty of turnovers, so while their defense is volatile, they make the big plays. They force those turnovers. You got a superstar receiver in Sean Atkins that can make some plays in the passing game as well. I think USF keeps this one very, very close, if not wins the game outright.
I'm with Ron on this one as far as USF and the points. I don't think they win it outright. I think it's going to be a little bit of a scare for the Canes and really their first test of the season, a much tougher game than the Florida game. But, of course, they've been on the road already this season in a tough environment too. But I think the South Florida fans will come out in droves for this game as well. I just think that, we've seen Miami teams in the past struggle in spots like this. They find a way to win. They are the more talented team as opposed to finding a way to lose it like we saw last year against Georgia Tech. I like the Canes here. I think that they're probably going to, though, come a little bit back further down to earth as, Cam Ward, now the Heisman Trophy favorite. Not so sure I believe in that either. We head to Norman, Oklahoma, where normally the Sooners are playing UTEP for the third time in the season at this point. But, this time, actually, as a member of the SEC, they actually have to step it up. And Tennessee, who always seems to play one of the toughest schedules of the SEC teams, once again draws not just Oklahoma here in week 4, but they draw them on the road at night. So I mean, this is the story of Tennessee, and that's why generally when they're very good, they have earned that. The Floridas, the Alabamas, always on the schedule, but here now throw in Oklahoma on the road at night. Ron?
Yeah, for me in college football and the NFL as well, I'm always looking at line value, and it's why I rarely take teams. Notre Dame, I mentioned I was hesitant taking them because coming off a big blowout win, and Tennessee has looked absolutely dominant this year. But look at the matchups they've had: Chattanooga, FCS opponent; NC State, who has been miserable so far this year; and Kent State, one of the weakest, if not the weakest, FBS teams this season. Now you go on the road. Definitely the toughest matchup by far this season, and you're laying 7 points. I just don't see any value, and I wouldn't be surprised to see this go up to 7.5. There's some pressure right now at 7. So for me, Oklahoma, while they may not be as flashy on paper as Tennessee has been this season, they've played a pretty tough schedule with Houston and Tulane. I think they at least keep this one close, but we're getting so much value with the Sooners, I can't pass it up.
I'm going to roll with the Sooners and the points in this one as well. I've been roasted on Tennessee already this season betting against them, so I'll return to the well and see if they can roast me one more time. But the thing is that Oklahoma at home, oh man, the laundry will be flying. And usually Oklahoma the beneficiary of most of those calls at home. We saw them against an upstart Tulane team last week. Take care of business in that one, even covering the spread. And I think in this game as well, I think we could see Oklahoma probably win this game outright as the home dog. I think they are a very, very live home dog in this game.
Yeah, another one where I'm taking the over here because that line at 7, I could see it going both ways. I could see Tennessee, just absolutely coming in and adding to Oklahoma's disappointment, with that close game against Houston and almost, losing outright to Tulane last week. But I could also see Oklahoma showing up and this being a back and forth game that goes down to the very end. But whatever happens here, I think we're getting closer to 60 in this game. Wouldn't be surprised if we needed overtime either. So I'm going with the over between Oklahoma and Tennessee.
Next up, we head to Minnesota, where the Golden Gophers take on Iowa for the Floyd of Rosedale game, which we now, of course, call the Jay Briggs special here at Pick Dogs after last year's disaster. But the thing is that the Gophers, 2.5-point home dogs in this one. Iowa last week, I tell you, I think the word that we call this Iowa offense, I think mundane is the perfect word here. I mean, they're just, I don't even know what you call it. And I got to say, there's a reason we know why Cade McNamara couldn't start at Michigan, because he's not good. And I think, he fits in perfectly again for an Iowa team that isn't very good. We saw them against Troy laying, 2 touchdowns and a field goal last week. I mean, they didn't even get a whiff of covering in that game. They were lucky to win by what they won by. They lost at home to Iowa State. And here they are on the road at Minnesota. I think they get flecked. I think the Gophers win the pig. I'm going to take the Minnesota Gophers to win outright in this game against Iowa.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take Minnesota as well. I'm going to lean towards the over as well in this thing because, as much as we bash Cade McNamara, he has still given Iowa some semblance of an offense. They've been able to at least move the ball through the air a couple times a game, which was something that we couldn't say last year. But I still think Minnesota is the better team. They got better quarterback play with Max Brosmer. He's given Minnesota a decent quarterback option. And in the end, I just think Minnesota's defense holds here. So I'm going to go with the over, but I'm also going to go with Minnesota.
Yeah, I like the over as well, because while we know Iowa as a team, it's all defense first, second, and third. I don't think this defense is as dominant as we've seen in recent years. I mean, you give up 21 points to Troy. Troy team is basically in the first year of a rebuild, and their offense has not been great so far. I mean, that's a concern for me. Now you go on the road. I think Minnesota's going to put up some points. I think Iowa, who's been able to run the football well, also chips in. I like Minnesota to win the game, and I like the over. The under is 4-1 in the last 5 meetings, but I think we go over in this one.
Yeah, still talking about that last one behind the scenes. Fair catch signal? Not a fair catch signal. Anyways, we've got Texas taking on ULM. Ewers, the Heisman Trophy favorite, now sidelined with an injury. In steps Arch Manning, who, as I said on our morning live show, the most college-ready, NFL-ready QB that I've ever seen walk onto a football field. I've watched a lot of games. You guys tell me in the comments how old I am all the time. Well, I've seen a lot of college football. I've never seen a guy more pro-ready. The day he stepped onto a college field, than this guy. I said it that day. I'll say it again. Chris, what are you thinking here in Austin as the Horns take on ULM? They are favored by a lot.
Yeah, this is for me an all-time quarterback matchup. You got Arch Manning against General Booty, but I think this is going to be a great spot for Texas to really flex some muscle here. Arch Manning has looked so good in limited action so far, but I think he is every bit the quarterback that a lot of people have made him out to be, and that the highly touted prospect that people have made him out to be. I think this one is all Texas all day. They have a matchup coming up against Mississippi State. It's not really a look-ahead spot for Texas. We say with ULM, that stands for you lose money when you back this team. So I'm going to go with Texas. I'm going to lay the big number here.
Yeah, I think Texas has no problems in this game, but I still think it's just too many points. I mean, the Longhorns 3-0, both straight up and against the number, blowout wins. I just think now at this point, too many points, 44.5. I think ULM does enough to at least limit the amount of possessions in this game. Their defense has actually been decent against the run so far. They've been able to get some pressure on the quarterback. I know it's definitely a much bigger step up from UAB to Texas, but I think ULM covers.
I'm going to go ULM plus the points as well. Not in love with it because I could see Texas scoring 65 or 70 points if they really apply themselves. But at the same time, it does leave that back door open when you have this many points. Also, with the world enamored with Arch Manning now, of course, not listening to me when I said it on the show the day after he took those first 2 snaps. But now they're all listening because I guess some of the other networks, as usual, trail us by weeks and months. But the thing is I think ULM, they played UAB. They waxed them. I mean, they absolutely waxed them, and it's not a bad UAB team. And I think that, having the time off and getting ready and prepped for this game, I think they're going to be in good shape. I'm going to take ULM and take the bundle of points, take my chances. Not rushing to the window, probably not even a full unit bet on this thing either. Next up, we head to Boulder, where the Colorado Buffalo take on Baylor. A lot of news on social media this week about Shedeur Sanders and the handshake that wasn't a handshake with the Colorado State quarterback. Congratulations, you beat a non-Power 4 team and acted like a real jerk about it. With all the cameras in the world on you, not really the place to do it. And I'll tell you, you would never see that on a Nick Saban coach team or a team like that. Just a total lack of respect for your opponent. Ron, do you think Baylor earns the respect of Colorado in this game?
Yeah, I think now because of the Colorado win and cover, we're actually getting value again, fading them in this spot. I mean, Baylor just took care of business easily against a triple option team in Air Force. They barely ran the ball for 6 yards a carry and held Air Force to under 200 rushing yards. Really impressive stuff. These Colorado games have been won and lost on the line, and that's the reason why Nebraska was able to get the blowout win. I think Baylor wins this game on the line as well. We're getting a couple points with the Bears. Definitely a much more impressive performance from Colorado last week, and they started to get the ground game going, but I don't think it's going to be enough here. I think it's definitely a big step up from Colorado State to Baylor.
Baylor held, Utah's offense to 170 rushing and 122 passing. They also sacked Utah a couple times in that game, and you got to figure with just a free run at the quarterback in this game like they're going to get against Shedeur Sanders, I think it's going to be the same script that we've seen a million times in these Colorado games. No offensive line, no defensive line. Dave Aranda on the hot seat still at Baylor this year, but I actually believe he's a pretty good coach, and I think we do have a big-time coaching mismatch in this one and a big-time mismatch in the trenches. I like Baylor big alternate line.
Yeah, I'm going to take Baylor as well, only because we've seen what happens when Colorado has faced a defense with a pulse this season. They went up against Colorado went up against Nebraska and got shellacked. And, this is a Baylor team that, hasn't played the toughest of schedules, but, they're just outside the top 10 in total defense. They're best in the country in passing yards allowed per game. So will that change here after playing Colorado? Maybe, but I still think Baylor can do enough here against a Colorado team that can't really run the football to get the job done. So give me Baylor in this one as well.
Last but not least for today's show, we head to Utah where the BYU Cougars take on Kansas State in a Big 12 battle. In all transparency here, Ron and I had two big disagreements last week behind the scenes on Saturday. He took the Kentucky Wildcats plus the points against Georgia. I was pretty adamant on the other side, but he also loved the Wyoming Cowboys against the Cougs. BYU, easy winner in that one. So we call that a wash in the books. But anyways, I think someone's going to get washed in this one. Ron, what do you think?
Yeah, you know what? I was not big on this BYU team going into the season, but I got to give credit where credit's due. I think head coach Kalani's done very, very well with his team, despite not having the most talent on paper. And this is always a tough spot. I mean, BYU is a very good home team. Kansas State, I was on them as a premium against Arizona on Friday. They played very well, but I do think they were the beneficiary of a lot of calls that went their way. A lot of that was because of the Arizona inexperience at the offensive line position. But there was at one point a drive that Arizona had 1st and 30 after a couple of holding calls. So they're not going to get those, they're not going to be the beneficiary here on the road at BYU. If anything, they're probably going to be on the unfortunate side of things. And I just think BYU's defense does enough here to cover the spread, and I think this could be a big-time upset win for BYU.
BYU is traditionally one of the most penalized teams in the country, but they're also usually one of the biggest offensive and defensive lines in the country. And I expect that to be a big factor. BYU throwing for 318 yards in Laramie last week, 140 on the ground as well against a decent Wyoming team, And I think in this one, I think it is upset alert in what is a much, much tougher building than people give them credit for. They think BYU, they think Mormons. I'll tell you what, man, the Mormons get it all out of their system in one place, and it's in this stadium. Look for a vicious home crowd and a BYU outright win in this one.
Yeah, I think I'm sticking with Kansas State here. I do respect what BYU has done up to this point, and I understand where people can come from with that upset alert that Kansas State already had when they went and played Tulane on the road this season. But I just think that BYU is going to be up against it here against this Kansas State defense, the toughest one they've played so far. I think Kansas State really showed some stuff in that win over Arizona. They went down 7-0 and really never looked back after they started to get ahead. And I think that Kansas State, just looking at it, I think they win this one by 10 points. I'm taking Kansas State.
And that wraps up week 4 of our college football schedule. Of course, we just covered the biggest games on the board on this show, but over at pickdogs.com, we cover every single game. And of course, you'll get our best bets over at Pick Dogs Premium. Be sure to use that discount code PICK. 15% off all of your picks, starting at $15 all the way up to yearly packages. Chris, should be a good week ahead. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. We broke down some of the big games, but there are plenty more betting opportunities. Lots of great matchups that we're going to have covered over at Pick Dogs. So make sure you guys go over and check them out.
Ron, anything in closing?
I'm excited. I see some great value spots here with some dogs, and maybe take some money line shots. Should be a great week.
Got a loaded card next week, including the Little Brown Jug game at the Big House as Michigan plays their 5th consecutive home game in 5 weeks. We've got a lot of other action as well, and we'll of course be covering all the big games, all the games that you want to hear about right here at Pick Dogs. And be sure to check out our individual pick videos as well as Chris's rundown of all the college football action every game every day. Make it a winning week, everybody. We appreciate you all.